Welcome to Midnight Terrors, where spine-chilling tales come to life. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tap the bell for notifications. You don't want to miss a single story that'll keep you up at night. We're on a mission to grow, and your support is everything. Share these terrifying stories with your friends, family, and anyone who dares to listen. Thanks for being part of the journey. Let's begin. Story number 1, The House Help's Potion. Mr. Gregory Daniels was a man feared by many. Known for his cruel demeanor, he ruled both his office and home with an iron fist. His employees dreaded his outbursts, and his family bore the brunt of his anger. It came as no surprise to the neighborhood when he drove his wife and 3 children out of the house one stormy night. Alone in his sprawling mansion, Mr. Daniels had only his young house help, Mercy, for company. Mercy was soft-spoken, diligent, and seemingly harmless, or so everyone thought. But beneath her meek exterior lay a simmering resentment. Mr. Daniels treated her as poorly as he treated everyone else. She had endured his verbal abuse and unreasonable demands for far too long. One fateful weekend, Mercy found herself at the end of her rope. Mr. Daniels' relentless cruelty had drained her spirit, and she couldn't bear another day of his demeaning words and impossible demands. She decided to visit her uncle, a man whose reputation preceded him, not as a kind old relative, but as a feared and enigmatic native doctor. Her uncle's home was nestled deep within a forest, shrouded in mist and surrounded by an eerie silence that made the birds seem afraid to sing. Mercy hesitated at the threshold, clutching her scarf tightly around her shoulders. Inside, the room was dimly lit by flickering candles, their shadows dancing on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and something else, a faint metallic tang that made her stomach churn. Her uncle sat cross-legged on a mat, his eyes sharp and unblinking. He was a man of few words, but his presence spoke volumes. Without asking, he gestured for her to sit. The moment she did, tears streamed down her face as she poured out her frustrations. She spoke of the insults, the endless yelling, the impossible tasks, and the way Mr. Daniels treated everyone as if they were beneath him. Her uncle listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When she finished, the room was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. Finally, he stood and walked to a wooden shelf lined with strange bottles and jars, each containing unidentifiable substances, dried roots, animal bones, and liquids that seemed to shimmer unnaturally. He selected a small vial filled with a murky, dark green liquid and held it up to the candlelight. "This," he said, his voice deep and deliberate, "will humble him." Mercy stared at the vial, the liquid inside swirling as if alive. "Pour it into his tea," he continued, handing it to her. His fingers were cold, his grip firm. "But remember this, child, what you do with this power comes with consequences." His gaze bore into her, and for a moment Mercy felt as though he could see into her soul. "The energy you release into the world will always find its way back to you. Are you prepared for that?" Mercy hesitated, her hands trembling as she held the vial. A part of her was afraid, not of Mr. Daniels, but of what this act might unleash. But the weight of her anger and desperation tipped the scales. She nodded slowly, clutching the vial as if it were her lifeline. Her uncle said nothing more. He simply turned away, his shadow stretching across the walls like a warning. As Mercy made her way back home, the vial felt heavier with every step, as though it carried not just a liquid, but the weight of her choice. The air around her seemed colder, the trees whispering secrets she couldn't quite catch. Deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just crossed a line she could never uncross. Her heart raced as she returned to the mansion. The next morning, she brewed Mr. Daniels' usual cup of tea, carefully adding a few drops of the potion. She handed it to him with a faint smile, her hands trembling. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Mercy went about her chores with a mix of anticipation and dread, watching Mr. Daniels with careful eyes. He was as demanding as ever, barking orders and slamming doors, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. But as the days turned into weeks, subtle cracks began to appear in his rigid demeanor. It started with sleepless nights. Mr. Daniels would pace his bedroom, muttering to himself about strange noises keeping him awake. Mercy overheard him one evening, speaking in an agitated tone to his reflection in the mirror, as if the glass itself had offended him. He brushed it off the next day, claiming it was just stress. But things escalated quickly. By the second week, Mr. Daniels began to change. His confident stride faltered, replaced by a nervous, jittery gait. At dinner, he flinched at the clatter of cutlery, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting something or someone to appear. The shadows in his house seemed to deepen, twisting unnaturally in the corners, and he swore they moved when he wasn't looking. He complained of vivid nightmares that left him drenched in sweat, bolting upright in bed at ungodly hours. In these dreams, faceless figures surrounded him, their hollow voices chanting his name. They dragged him into endless darkness, their icy grip paralyzing him with fear. He would wake, gasping for air, only to find faint whispers echoing through his empty halls. His paranoia took hold next. He began accusing employees of plotting against him, his voice rising in pitch and fury. "I see what you're doing," he shouted at his assistant one afternoon, veins bulging in his neck. "You're all trying to undermine me." His accusations made no sense, yet the intensity of his belief left everyone shaken. In the third week, his temper exploded. Files flew off desks, doors slammed so hard the walls trembled, and employees scattered like leaves in the wind. But it wasn't just anger, it was fear. Mr. Daniels was unraveling, his sanity slipping through his fingers like grains of sand. One night, Mercy heard him scream. The sound was unlike anything she had ever heard before, a raw, guttural cry that echoed through the house and sent chills racing down her spine. She rushed to his room, feigning concern, and found him cowering in a corner, his face pale as a sheet. "They were here," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The shadows, they were watching me. I could feel their eyes everywhere." Mercy's stomach churned, but she forced herself to remain calm. She murmured reassurances, her own heart pounding as she glanced at the dark corners of the room. Was it her imagination, or did the shadows flicker unnaturally, as though alive? As Mr. Daniels spiraled deeper into madness, the house itself seemed to take on a life of its own. Lights flickered without cause, mirrors cracked spontaneously, and a cold, oppressive air settled over every room. Mercy began to question if the vial's power had gone far beyond what even her uncle had intended. What had she unleashed, and could it ever be stopped? Then came the night everything unraveled. Mr. Daniels stayed late at his office to prepare for an important presentation. Around midnight, he was startled by the sound of singing. It wasn't from the street or a nearby office, but from the conference room. Curious and annoyed, he stormed toward the sound. Inside, he found a group of janitors and night shift workers deep in prayer. They were holding an impromptu prayer session, their voices raised in fervent worship. One of the workers saw Mr. Daniels and invited him to join. He scoffed, but, inexplicably, found himself unable to leave. As the prayers intensified, something within him snapped. He clutched his head and screamed, collapsing to the floor. Memories flashed before his eyes. Mercy adding the potion to his tea, her uncle chanting over a pot, and a dark figure standing at the foot of his bed every night since. When he opened his eyes, Mercy was standing in the doorway of the office, her face pale and her body trembling. Under the weight of the prayer, she fell to her knees and began to sob uncontrollably. "I did it," she cried. "I gave you the potion. My uncle said it would make you suffer for all the pain you've caused." The room fell silent as the workers looked on in shock. Mercy's confession was interrupted by her own screams as she clawed at her skin, claiming to feel fire coursing through her veins. She ran out into the street, wailing like a banshee, and was never seen again. Mr. Daniels, shaken to his core, vowed to change his ways. He begged for forgiveness from his estranged wife and children, and sought to make amends with those he had wronged. Though haunted by the events, he saw it as a second chance to become a better man. But late at night, he often awoke in a cold sweat, still hearing Mercy's anguished cries echoing in his mind. Quick pause. Enjoying the content? Help us reach more people by sharing this video or recommending our channel to a friend. Your support is what makes this channel possible. Story number 2, The House Helps Ring. A tale of darkness and deceit. When Daniel left his remote village for the bustling city, it wasn't ambition or desperation driving him, it was escape. In his hometown, whispers of his dark affiliations with a feared cult had grown too loud to ignore. Daniel, a sworn devotee of the Order of the Black Crescent, carried with him a simple yet sinister artifact, a silver ring engraved with the cult's ancient insignia. It wasn't just any ring, it was a vessel of power, capable of bending weak minds to his will. Upon arrival in the city, Daniel landed a job as a house help in the sprawling mansion of Mr. and Mrs. Richards, a wealthy couple with two teenage daughters, Emily and Grace. They welcomed Daniel warmly, impressed by his polite demeanor and willingness to work hard. But beneath his humble exterior, Daniel harbored dark intentions. Daniel's ring began its work subtly. It emitted a faint glow whenever he concentrated on someone, making them pliable, almost entranced. Neighbors' wives would stop by the Richards' home under various pretexts, borrowing sugar, dropping off invitations, only to fall prey to Daniel's charm. His smooth words, laced with the ring's malevolent influence, turned their casual visits into illicit affairs. What made it worse was the eerie synchronicity of their actions. It was as if the women in the neighborhood were all under the sway of an unseen puppeteer, their movements strangely coordinated. They would drift to the Richards' home at odd hours, mid-morning, late afternoons, even after sunset, each carrying a flimsy excuse for their visit, borrowing a teaspoon of sugar, dropping off a misplaced scarf, delivering a plate of cookies no one had asked for. When they returned home, their husbands noticed the same unsettling details. A far-off look in their eyes, the inability to recall exactly why they had gone to the Richards' house in the first place. Their hands trembled as they fumbled with keys, their voices distant, as if they were struggling to break free from an invisible fog. Some even murmured Daniel's name in their sleep, whispering it like a secret they didn't understand. The gossip spread like wildfire, but no one could pinpoint the cause. "Did you see how Mrs. Turner stumbled out of the Richards' place yesterday? Looked like she'd seen a ghost. I swear, I've never seen Mrs. Evans blush like that. What's going on in that house?" The whispers grew louder, yet no one dared confront Daniel. His unassuming smile and calm demeanor made it all seem too implausible to accuse him outright. But there was something about those visits, an unshakable, gnawing sense that the women were drawn by more than just charm. A shadow seemed to cling to Daniel, as if his very presence emitted a silent hum that disrupted the air around him. For some, it felt like a magnetic pull they couldn't resist, an attraction that wasn't natural. For others, it was an inexplicable fear, as though they were standing on the edge of a cliff but couldn't see the drop. The mystery deepened when the same women began losing track of time. "I could have sworn I was only there for 5 minutes," one would say, her brows furrowed, "but I got home and 2 hours had passed." They brushed it off as forgetfulness or exhaustion, but in the back of their minds an unspoken terror festered. No one could explain it, but everyone felt it. The Richards' home was no longer just another house in the neighborhood. It was becoming something else entirely. And Daniel, with his unassuming smile and glowing ring, was at the center of it all. Inside the house, Daniel's manipulation turned even darker. Emily and Grace, innocent and trusting, found themselves inexplicably drawn to him. He used his ring to weave a web of deceit around their young minds, filling their heads with lies of love and promises of a future together. Over time, both sisters fell victim to his control, and before long, the unthinkable happened. They were both pregnant. The news devastated the Richards family. Mr. Richards, a man of staunch discipline, was enraged, demanding answers from his daughters. But they could only stammer vague excuses, unable to explain how Daniel had so completely infiltrated their lives. Daniel didn't stop at seduction. His greed knew no bounds. Late at night, he would roam the house silently, the glow of his ring guiding him like a predator in the dark. Gold necklaces, diamond earrings, stacks of cash from Mr. Richards' study, all disappeared into Daniel's stash. He charmed the family into dismissing the losses as carelessness or misplacement. Emboldened by his success, he began targeting the neighborhood. Jewelry boxes, purses, and safes seemed to unlock themselves when he was near. Word spread of a phantom thief, and panic gripped the community. But every reign of darkness has its limits. One evening, a particularly religious neighbor, Mrs. Carter, visited the Richards household. She immediately sensed something off about Daniel. Her sharp eyes lingered on the faint glow of the ring as he carried a tray of tea into the living room. Mrs. Carter confronted Daniel, asking where he had gotten such a peculiar piece of jewelry. His usual charm faltered under her piercing gaze. Feeling threatened, Daniel lashed out, but Mrs. Carter was prepared. She clasped a crucifix around her neck and began praying fervently. Daniel staggered back, clutching his chest as the ring emitted a searing heat. The glow intensified, burning his finger and forcing him to tear it off. Without the ring's power, his crimes unraveled swiftly. The Richards' daughters confessed under tearful duress, revealing Daniel's manipulation. A search of his quarters uncovered the stolen valuables, along with letters from his cult detailing his mission to exploit and destroy. The police were called, and Daniel was arrested amidst the stunned silence of the Richards family. As the police car drove him away, Daniel's gaze lingered on the ring, now lying in the evidence bag. Its glow had faded, but the darkness it represented lingered in the air, a chilling reminder of the danger lurking behind a facade of innocence. For the Richards family and their community, Daniel's betrayal was a haunting lesson. Trust must be earned, and evil often wears a smile. They rebuilt their lives, but the shadow of the house help and his cursed ring remained a scar they would never forget. Sometimes the scariest horrors are the ones we invite into our homes unknowingly. This story serves as a reminder to stay vigilant, protect your loved ones, and trust your instincts. Evil doesn't always knock. It slips in when we're not looking. Stay sharp, stay safe, and don't forget, not everything that glitters is good.